I don't think I got all of this.
That was the choked-up sentence spoken in the interrogation room as the tape was played, the tape that had been found in the cabin in the woods. On the screen, two unfamiliar young men were laughing and tearing open each gift, the very gifts Lenai's family had carefully prepared for a truly special Christmas night. But that was only the beginning. December 1990, in a small cabin nestled deep within the snowy stillness of a Utah town, Lenai had no way of knowing that someone had already slipped inside. Not only had they broken in, but they had stayed there, waiting for her entire family to return. Back in the 90s, the world was stepping into a new era, a time of change, when technology began quietly weaving its way into every corner of daily life. But in Oakley, a small town in the state of Utah, everything still felt peacefully untouched. Only around 600 people lived there, and for nearly a century, crime was virtually non-existent. That's also why the Tiede family kept their tradition of spending Christmas at a place they called Tiede's Tranquility, a secluded wooden cabin tucked deep in the mountains and forest. Every December, no matter how busy life got, the whole family would gather there. They held small celebrations, with friends, with loved ones, a warm fireplace, and a glowing Christmas tree. But most importantly, they had each other. Moments of togetherness that nothing else in the world could ever replace. That cabin wasn't just a vacation home, it was truly cut off from the outside world. To get there, you had to travel nearly 4 kilometers off the main road. And in the winter, the only way in was by snowmobile. Whatever you needed, food, supplies, anything, had to be planned ahead of time. Because once you were in, getting back out wasn't something you could just decide on a whim. But that's also what gave the place its own special kind of beauty. Surrounded by snow-covered trees, it was a space where memories took root. The sound of children's laughter echoing through the woods, stories shared by the fire, and family dinners where every seat was filled. The person holding the camera in the footage was Lenai. But to truly understand this story, we have to start with the head of the family, Rolf Tiede, Lenai's father. A 51-year-old man of German descent. He came to the U.S. with his mother at the age of 11, and from then on, began a life of hard work in a foreign land. When he was young, Rolf was lucky enough to meet Kay, a gentle and beautiful woman. They fell in love and had a cozy wedding at a church in Salt Lake in May 1963. After getting married, they moved to Humble, Texas and became devout members of the LDS Mormon Church. Both Rolf and Kay had difficult childhoods, so they deeply valued family. They always dreamed of having a big, bustling home with many little children to care for and raise together. But life doesn't always go the way we hope. In the early years of their marriage, the couple tried everything but couldn't have children. They visited doctors everywhere, tried all kinds of treatments and diets, but nothing changed. The sadness grew heavier each day, yet they refused to give up. They made a heartfelt decision to open their hearts and choose adoption as a way to give and receive love. And the first little girl they brought home was Lenai. 3 years later, with their finances more stable, Rolf and his wife welcomed another child, a boy named Scotty. Now with 2 kids, a boy and a girl, the family's warmth grew even stronger. Then a miracle happened when they least expected it. Just weeks after adopting Scotty, Kay suddenly discovered she was 2 months pregnant. The whole family was overwhelmed with joy. A few months later, they welcomed their youngest daughter, and just like that, their little family grew to be full and overflowing with love. Life gradually settled into a steady rhythm. Rolf started his own business and found great success, even opening his own company. Meanwhile, Kay stayed home as a homemaker. But not because she was forced. She genuinely wanted to devote all her time to caring for the children. She was dedicated and willing to sacrifice everything for her family. Their love for their children was so great that, for many years, they never flew on the same plane together. There was only one reason for this. If anything were to happen, at least one of them would be there to take care of the kids, because they always put safety first. On December 20th, 1990, right before the Christmas holiday, instead of the whole family traveling together from Texas to the cabin in Utah like every year, only Kay and their son Scotty flew ahead. Once there, the two of them met Kay's sister, Aunt Claudia, and together they took a snowmobile to the cabin. On the way, with the temperature dropping to minus 20 degrees Celsius, they suddenly spotted a stranger, a young man in his early 20s with messy curly hair, walking through the snow. Strangely, he was wearing only a thin jacket, jeans, and tennis shoes. No socks, no hat. His nose and ears were bright red, and frozen snot hung in icicles. Kay stopped the snowmobile, rolled down the window, and asked, "Are you okay? Do you need any help?" The young man looked back, said nothing, showed no emotion, and silently turned away. A gut feeling told Kay that something was wrong. The young man's gaze sent a chill down her spine, an indescribable sense of unease. Although the three of them made it safely to the cabin. That evening, the image of the stranger haunted Kay's mind nonstop. She immediately called her husband. "Honey, tomorrow when you come to the cabin, make sure to bring something for protection. I don't feel safe." Rolf, on the other end of the line, sounded surprised. "Why? This area is safe? Who would come all the way out here?" But Kay was firm. "I met someone really strange. Just trust me and bring something with you." And perhaps, at that moment, even Kay didn't realize that a mother's and a wife's gut feeling was right. The next day, December 21st, Rolf, along with his two daughters, Line, 20, and Tricia, 16, flew to Utah and arrived at the cabin, bringing with them the item Kay had asked for. The Christmas spirit filled the air. The whole family decorated the tree together, hung stockings, and arranged gifts beneath its branches. The feeling was warm and peaceful. That evening, Scotty went over to Aunt Claudia's house to play, while Rolf, Kay, and their two daughters stayed at Kay's mother's home, Beth, who was 72 years old. On the morning of December 22nd, while Rolf and Tricia drove up to Salt Lake City to shop, Kay, Beth, and Linne took a snowmobile ahead to the cabin to prepare for the Christmas party. As they neared the cabin, Linne suddenly saw a figure flicker past the window. But she didn't pay much attention, thinking it was probably Uncle David, the playful relative of the family. Once inside, Linne hurried to the kitchen to wash her hands and warm up. But as she was washing her hands, she had the feeling like someone had just walked by and was standing hidden behind the fridge. Linne was still convinced it was Uncle David, so she teased, "Uncle David, I know it's you." But the person who stepped out was not Uncle David. It was a stranger, a young man with curly hair. He was holding something in his hand. Line didn't get a clear look. At the same time, a noise came down from upstairs. Lene began to worry. Her mother and grandmother were up there. The young man forced Lene upstairs. Upstairs, another young man was already there. Her mother tried to talk calmly, trying to negotiate with them. "Please stay calm. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Can we sit down and talk? Why did you come in here?" But before she could finish her sentence, her mother collapsed. Linne panicked and rushed to her mother's side. Another loud noise echoed. The young man with curly hair turned toward Beth, Lene's grandmother, as she spoke. Before pulling the trigger, he shouted, "Shut up, old woman." As the situation in the cabin grew more tense, Lene saw her mother, though severely wounded, still trying to move, perhaps to protect her daughter. But that small movement made one of the two men hesitate no longer. He fired another shot. This time, Kay was gone, right before Lene's eyes. At that moment, Lene couldn't bear it anymore. She just knelt down, tears streaming nonstop, crying and praying in utter despair. But all that remained now was pain. The two strange men showed no emotion whatsoever. They began ransacking the cabin. Anything valuable was taken, from electronics and money to Lene's grandmother's jewelry. They wouldn't let the girl make any calls or go outside, locking her inside a room. Then Lene heard the curly-haired man ask the other, "What now?" The other replied coldly, "Let the snow cover it." And then they did it. Lene clearly heard the creak of the door opening. They dragged her mother's and grandmother's bodies out onto the balcony, intending to let the snow cover all traces. But instead of leaving, the most painful part was, they stayed. Sitting in the cabin, right there in the living room, the very place that used to be the warmest spot for Lene's family every Christmas. Both acted as if nothing had happened, still smiling, still chewing gum, still tearing open the gift boxes that Lene and her family had prepared. The presents, meant for a warm and joyful family evening, had now become the entertainment of two strangers. Late that afternoon, the sound of a snowmobile echoed outside. It was Rolf and his youngest daughter, Tricia, returning. Immediately, the curly-haired man forced Linnae to open the door. He stood close behind her, holding her tightly to maintain control. "Open the door slowly," he said, his eyes never leaving the front door. The other man was already ready inside. As the door opened, Rolf looked at his daughter, her eyes red-rimmed, her face filled with fear. Just by looking at her gaze, he knew something was terribly wrong. Instantly, his mind raced through every possible way to handle the situation. But Linnae's pleading eyes stopped him from acting rashly. He knew that one wrong move could put his daughter in danger. While still hesitating, the second man suddenly stepped forward and shouted, "Hands up!" Rolf remained unusually calm. He spoke slowly and clearly, word by word. "All right, I have money. Here." He pulled out 100 and a handful of loose change from his jacket pocket. "I can give you more, whatever you want. I can provide. Just please don't hurt my children." The curly-haired man started losing patience. The other seemed hesitant. Then suddenly, the curly-haired man growled, "Leave this to me." Before he could finish, a sudden action caused Rolf to collapse to the floor. At that moment, Tricia, the youngest daughter, was just approaching the door carrying a bag of food. She didn't understand what was happening, but saw her father fall. Panicked, she ran over and tightly hugged Linnae, asking repeatedly, "Where's Mom? Where's Mom?" Linnae only gently shook her head, her lips trembling, unable to speak. And with just that shake of the head, Tricia understood everything. The atmosphere seemed to freeze. Both girls fell silent, overwhelmed by panic and numbness. Meanwhile, the curly-haired man started moving around the house. He began cleaning up, erasing traces as if he had planned it all along. But he didn't stop there. He planned to take both Linnae and Tricia away from the cabin. Before leaving, he turned to look at Rolf, the father lying there seemingly motionless. And perhaps he was wrong, because in that very moment, a father's love for his children gave Rolf an unexpected strength. A man who seemed defeated found an extraordinary will to fight fate, in a way no one could have predicted. After everything that happened inside the cabin, the two men didn't stop. They forced Linnae and Tricia onto the snowmobiles, making the two sisters carry all the belongings, Christmas presents, valuables, jewelry, back to the parking lot in town, nearly 4 kilometers away. On the way, unexpectedly, they ran into Uncle Randy, Linnae and Tricia's father's younger brother. He was riding a snowmobile from town toward the cabin and saw the two girls from afar, waving and calling out loudly, "Hey girls!" In that very moment, Linnae and Tricia felt like they were suffocating. The chance to call for help was right in front of them. But if they made a sound, would the curly-haired man hurt their uncle? Would it put their family in danger? In that brief instant, they faced an agonizing choice: stay silent to protect their uncle, or risk everything by crying out for help. They chose silence. They only gave a slight nod in return, Tricia's eyes welling up with tears. But it was that very look that made Uncle Randy suspicious. Something wasn't right. Yet he didn't stop immediately. He kept going a few hundred meters further, and then suddenly saw his older brother, Rolf, exhausted but still conscious. In the car, Tricia tried to stay calm, constantly thinking of ways to buy time. She said she needed to use the restroom. The curly-haired man hesitated and seemed about to pull into a nearby gas station. But the other man shook his head. "No, keep driving," Tricia whispered to herself. "Stay patient. Wait until we reach a busier place. I can't leave Linnae behind." Time seemed to stretch endlessly. No one spoke. Tension filled the air. Then, a siren blared behind them. Red and blue lights flashed through the rearview mirror. "Police!" the curly-haired man shouted, starting to panic. He sped up. The Lincoln raced down the snow-covered road, going over 40 miles per hour trying to escape. But then he lost control. The car spun around, skidded, and came to a stop near the roadside. The police lights surrounded them. They were trapped. The two men knew there was no way out. Finally, they surrendered. Linnae and Tricia were taken to the police station. Through tears, shaking and sobbing, they recounted everything. After Linnea and Tricia were rescued, the small town in Utah, known for its peace and quiet for over a century, was left shocked and filled with unanswered questions. Who could be cruel enough to cause such a horrific tragedy to a family just preparing to celebrate Christmas? And how did those two strangers manage to find their way to the isolated cabin deep in the snowy 4C? The answer stunned everyone. The two perpetrators were Vaughn Taylor, 24 years old, and Edward Delly, 21 years old. Both had been released on parole just 6 days earlier from a rehabilitation center. Both had prior records for disorderly conduct and were living at a halfway house, a facility for people preparing to reintegrate into the community. At the trial, Vaughn admitted to his actions against Linnea and her mother in exchange for having some of the more serious charges dropped. However, throughout the proceedings, he repeatedly changed his testimony, sometimes claiming he didn't remember anything, other times blaming everything on Edward. Especially shocking was a video that stunned everyone in the courtroom. Vaughn chewing gum and laughing as he opened Christmas presents belonging to the Tiede family, all amidst the chaos and tragedy. While Vaughn showed little remorse, Linnea, Tricia, and Mr. Rolfe, still grieving the loss of their mother and grandmother, stood strong to testify. Linnea's voice trembled slightly but remained resolute. Please deliver a fair judgment. In the end, Vaughn received a sentence fitting the gravity of his crimes. As for Edward, he tried to prove that he was only following Vaughn's orders. This was partly confirmed by Linnea, who recalled that Edward had refused to harm her father and during their captivity, occasionally stopped by to comfort her. After 12 hours of tense deliberation, the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. Everyone understood that a retrial would force the Tiede family to relive their nightmare all over again. In the end, Edward received a lighter sentence as a way to close that painful chapter. But that wasn't the end. In 2010, a legal loophole led to Vaughn's temporary release, shocking and angering the Tiede family. Yet just 2 years later, in 2021, Vaughn was arrested again. By August 2024, as Utah prepared to carry out its first special execution in over a decade, Vaughn knew. His day of judgment was drawing very near. 10 years passed. From prison, Edward wrote a handwritten letter to Linnea. He said, "I have changed. I truly regret the pain I caused your family." Linnea read that letter over and over for many years, reading it and then folding it away, then reading it again, and finally she decided to forgive. Not because Edward deserved it, but because she deserved to live in peace. No one can erase the wounds, but we can learn to live with them. My mom and grandmother always taught me that love is stronger than anything else. The Tiede family later kept a simple yet precious tradition. They always reunited at Christmas. A new cabin was built, not the old Tiede tranquility anymore, but a place where the laughter of children echoes every winter. Linnea and Tricia, now both married, have lovely, smart children, just as they had dreamed of when they were little. In 2008, brave Father Rolfe passed away after a serious illness. At the funeral, his two daughters stood before everyone, choked with emotion, and said, "Dad was always our hero, not just because he saved us that day, but because throughout his life, he taught us how to face every hardship with courage and love." The Tiede family's new cabin is more than just a place to live. It has become a symbol, a place where love, loss, and the strength to overcome adversity come together. A place where the memories of Kay and Grandma Beth live on through stories told to the next generation, through the photos hung on the walls, and through familiar dishes served during the holidays. That heartbreaking story was later adapted into a film, The Utah Cabin Murders, which drew widespread attention across the United States and around the world. But for the Tiede family, no movie could ever fully capture everything they had lived through, because no one can truly recreate a mother's love, a grandmother's care, a courageous father's strength, or the incredible spirit of two young women who rose from hell to live, to love, and to forgive.